Hello and welcome to the 4th Tapestry Education Conference. I'm Helen Edwards, one of the founders of the Foundation Stage Forum, an online community established in 2003 to support everyone with a professional interest in early years education. The theme of this event, parental engagement, is very close to our hearts. We launched Tapestry in 2012 as a tool to support schools and settings build and maintain effective relationships with the parents and carers of the children they work with. Importantly, we wanted Tapestry to be a two-way communication tool where parents and carers contributed to the child's learning journey, a tool where parents felt they were an integral part of their child's development. The whole team here at the FSF and Tapestry wholeheartedly believe that children are happier and do better when their parents and carers are actively engaged in their development and learning. And we hear so many voices from the sector that share this belief. For example, we recently conducted a survey of almost 400 early years educators around their experiences of parental engagement over the last year, including supportive families who experienced barriers to engagement. The results showed that well-established methods, such as face-to-face meetings, phone calls, and having a key person for each child and family, are used effectively alongside tools such as video. 30% of settings and schools will continue to use video to communicate with families. And of course, online learning journals have played their part. This year has instigated wide reflection on a number of issues, but none more so, in my view, than our parent partnerships. How schools and settings can nurture these relationships and have the maximum positive impact on a child's learning and development. More than 3/4 of our survey respondents reported that children's learning outcomes improve and that the child is more engaged with their learning experience when their significant adults are actively involved too. Virtually everyone who responded to the survey told us that a clear plan was important in developing partnerships with parents. If your plan is in its development stages, or you are reflecting on CPD to improve partnership with parents, then we're really delighted you've joined us today. I'm absolutely certain that over the next 2 hours, you'll be inspired by our speakers and be able over the coming weeks and months to explore ideas around developing your own approaches. A recording of this event and the speakers' presentations will be available on our website afterwards. You're very welcome to type in a question during the presentations. You'll only see your own question, but we will be collating the questions ready to ask the speaker. If you're posting about this on social media, please use the hashtag Tapestry Talks with 2 capital T's. I mentioned earlier that the Tapestry team is not the only group who think parental engagement is absolutely essential. An organisation that's working hard in this area is the charity Learning with Parents, and I'm so pleased that Tom Harbour, its CEO, is our guest host for this afternoon. Tom taught in Leicester and in Germany and completed a master's degree around parental engagement, reflecting on the important role parents have in supporting their child's learning. He's delivered training around parental engagements to school leaders across the UK and Europe and to organisations in the US and Africa. Learning with Parents aims to support all children with a particular focus on empowering the most disadvantaged families to feel comfortable and motivated to engage with their child's learning. Tom will be introducing our speakers and posing some questions after their presentations. But first, he's going to tell us a bit more about his work and the motivations that led to the birth of Learning with Parents. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you so much, Helen, and thank you everyone for coming along today at what I'm sure is the end of a long Thursday. I'll just share my screen. So, as Helen mentioned, my name is Tom Harbour and I'm founder and CEO of the charity Learning with Parents. Our vision is that every child is supported at home to fulfil their potential. And my route into this all was, as Helen mentioned, as a classroom teacher. I got really interested in the gap between children that were eligible for free school meals and their more affluent peers. As I'm sure many of you will know, on average, children eligible for free school meals are 4 months behind by age of 5, and this gap has grown to 9 months on average by the time they finish primary school. Now, this research is from back in 2019, so it's pre-pandemic, and what we know, although we don't have the exact figures, is that the gap has widened over the last 18 months. So I think as we come out of transition out of pandemic, we really need to have this as a core focus for us going forwards. How are we going to look to narrow this gap between the poorest children and their more affluent peers? And whilst doing the masters that Helen referenced, this one bit of research really sort of stuck with me. So it's a paper from the Institute of Fiscal Studies, which was looking at how pupil premium should be spent. And what they found is at the age of 11, so at the end of primary school, only 14% of the gap between children eligible for free school meals and their more affluent peers is related to what's happened in school, whereas almost half of the gap is related to what happens at home. So the IFS summarised, if we're really serious about narrowing this gap, we can't just leave it all up to schools and think that it's all going to happen within the school building. We have to be looking at what happens in the sort of broader education sphere. So what's needed if we're going to really harness the power of parents to try and narrow the education gap? Well, there's obviously a lot and it's very complex, and I've just sort of drawn out a couple of messages that I think are really key. So firstly, I think we need to explicitly focus our attention on those parents who are facing the biggest barriers. It's really easy for practitioners to design activities that might be done at home that sort of accidentally exclude the families that we most want to reach. So they might be using printed resources and reliant on a printer, and even being reliant on pen and paper. They might be sort of set up with a middle-class mindset of do this over dinner time whilst you're all sitting down at the dinner table together, and that might not speak to some of the families that we really work on. And what we know is that where schools and practitioners just focus on activities that work for any family, they often exclude the most disadvantaged. But in the best settings, where they really design home learning activities and support around the most disadvantaged families, they still reach all the others. Suma will talk more later on about marginalised parents and how important it is to focus on them. Secondly, I wasn't really sure exactly what to call this, but parent power. As Janet will mention, education is more than just what happens within the confines of the bricks and mortar of the school building. But it can feel as a parent like actually the only thing that matters really is what's happening inside the classroom. And I think that we need to reflect as practitioners on that power dynamic that exists between the teacher and the parent. Why is it that I, as a trainee teacher, even in my first year, was able to sit down with parents and say to them, these are my hopes for your child for the next year, but we didn't really build the space to hear what the parents' hopes were for their child for the next 12 months? Why is it that often when parents come into school, they're sat down, in rows in child-sized seats to listen to a teacher presentation, where if they've had own negative experiences of school, that can all sort of come flooding back. I think this is more than just parent voice and saying, hey, parents, we should probably listen to some of them and include them in school decisions. I think this is really trying to flip it and say, if you look at it from a child's point of view, they have their practitioner, who's a really important person in their life and maybe changes each year, but they have that sort of key teacher figure. But they also have a key parent figure and parent guardian, whoever that adult may be, who they look up to in just as equal terms. And we need to think of education in that sort of sense. Finally, I think, again, I'm sure Janet will talk about this later, but we know that lots of schools and lots of practitioners are really focused on parental involvement in schooling. So what I mean by that is how parents can, what schools can do to get parents in to their parents' evening or coffee mornings or that sort of thing. And that's all great, but it's not an end result. The end result, the thing that actually impacts the child, is the little interactions that they're having at home behind closed doors, what we call parental engagement in learning. And we need to shift the focus away from how do we get the parents into the school or involved with the school, and how do we get them engaged in their child's learning and support that over time. So, as I mentioned, our charity's vision is that every child supported at home to fulfill their potential. And we have sort of two sides to our work. So briefly, we have a parental engagement collaboration strand where we bring together organisations who are working in this area and help them to reflect and share best practice. And we also have our own programmes working with primary schools and early years settings across the country. And our programmes come from a basis that all parents want the best for their child, but many parents struggle to convert those good intentions into the daily habits and routines in how they interact. So I won't go into it in huge detail, but in essence, what we're working with schools to do is to take homework in that sort of early years, key stage 1 area, and replace it with opportunities for all families to have those hands-on interactions and that hands-on engagement that really makes a difference to their child's life chances. We've developed a lot of low resource, really accessible activities and ways that schools can track and monitor this as well with support from our charity. So if you're interested in finding out more about our work, then do get in touch with me, Tom at learningwithparents.com, or through our website. And we're working with a lot of great organisations, one of which obviously is a Tapestry that we're really excited to be presenting this conference together with. So that's enough about our work at Learning with Parents. I'm really excited to introduce you to the sort of fantastic speakers that we have here today. So Jamel, Janet and Suma really bring a research and a practitioner and a parent perspective on this issue, and really excited to have brought all of them here together today. So we'll start off with Jamel. He's an early years educator, consultant and children's author. And he might not look like it, but he's been in the industry for over 19 years. Early years is his speciality, but he's worked in youth clubs, schools, been a mentor and supported children with SEND. Jamal's also one of the UK's Men in the Early Years ambassadors. He's passionate about the early years, and he stresses the importance of having men in the early years and the importance of having a balanced, diverse, inclusive workforce, curriculum and pedagogy. So Jamel, thank you very much for joining us today, and over to you.
Start my video. Hello. Blessings, Tom. Okay, let me start it off with a little song about education. This is by Warrior King. It's called Education is the Key. Education is the key for betterment in this modern time, Education is the key for betterment. Never you wasting time, don't you wasting time. Education is the key for betterment in this modern time, Education is the key for betterment. Just open your mind. Just open your mind. Knowledge makes me old, it makes me stronger. Develops the intellect, it makes me wiser. More precious than the gold and the silver. Oh, I'm appealing to the youngsters, children. Never you wasting time and farm fool. Go ahead and learn the golden rules. Mama always said never be stubborn like a mule. But education does not stop in other schools. Education is the key for betterment in this modern time. And I'll stop it there. Blessings to you all. Reflecting on parental engagement is the topic of the day. I'll be talking about building, maintaining and keeping the connection. Now in that song, it says that education exceeds the confines of school. It exceeds the confines of school. Education starts within the home, and it's important that us, the professionals, the educators, we keep the learning experience consistent, and we engage with our parents, and we ensure that what's being done at home in some way could be mirrored within the setting, and what's happening within the setting can then be mirrored at home. Also, let me start off with a bit about me. As the introduction says, I'm an early years educator and consultant. I'm a children's author and one of the UK's Men in Early Years champions. As we know, the early years sector, the workforce is made up of 4% males. And when it comes to Black men in the sector, we make up around about 0.3, 0.4. And that's a big thing. That's a big thing. Because when it comes to engaging with our families, you know, often our parents are walking into settings with a workforce that doesn't reflect the dynamic of home. You know, they're not seeing people that look like them. Especially the dads, you know, Black dads, sometimes they struggle, you know, with coming into a setting because they're seeing a lot of faces that don't look like them, so they can't relate and they can't connect. And sometimes seeing a person like myself is a breath of fresh air, you know, because I'm able to meet them at their level and communicate and connect with them in a way that other members of staff may not have been able to connect with them, you know. Will Smith also, he put up a quote. He says, "There's so much negative imagery of Black fatherhood. I've got tons of friends that are doing the right things by their kids and doing the right things as fathers. And how come that's not as newsworthy?" And when I read that quote, it made me think, you know, of my position in the early years, because, you know, the image of Black males in the news, the papers, all over social media, majority of the time is negative. Seeing Black males sitting in the seat that I sit in is a rarity. I'm like a unicorn, you know? So when I'm able to communicate with these dads, invite them in, involve them, and talk to them at a level that they understand and in a way that they understand, it brings me great joy. And when I was putting together this presentation, I reflected on the way that parents in general are viewed when they walk into a setting or they make communication with a setting. And it made me think about the fact that first impressions matter. First impressions matter. Before a parent steps into a setting for a viewing, we, the educators, the nursery owners, the PVIs, the childminders, and etc., we can have premeditated assumptions, preconceptions on who these people are and where they come from. And that's something we need to be careful about. We need to be fully aware of, because that in turn can affect our approach. I want that to sink in. That in turn can affect our approach. I was always taught that we must treat the doorman, the cleaner, and the people on the ground with the same respect and dignity that we would treat the CEOs and executive management teams with. Now, what do we need to understand? Well, we need to understand that parents have their own preconceptions and views. And this is made from word of mouth. This is made from online reviews. What they've observed in passing, when they're passing your setting, your what they've seen the staff doing, how the staff have presented themselves on the street, maybe when they're going to lunch or while they're playing out in the playground, and what they see from the children themselves. Are the children happy in this setting? Also, they have preconceptions made from the Ofsted reports and also from your phone mannerism when taking their booking to view your nursery. Now, how do we change these preconceptions? How can we? Well, preconceptions can be changed from the show around. The show around is such an important part of bringing, you know, parents around the setting and showing them who you are. It's a chance to initially meet the parents and understand who they are as people, because they are people. They're not just cash cows. They're not just there as to fill your pockets with their monthly fees. And it's a chance for them to meet you and introduce you and be introduced to your team. A chance for you to show off your nursery and sell the nursery to them. And it's a time where you can give parents a sense of security. And one thing we have to understand, you know, is that parent partnerships don't just start from when that parent signs on the dotted line and says they want their child to attend your setting. It starts from the first point of interaction. What comes next after they sign on that dotted line is the settling in days. One of the most important periods of time in parents and children's lives. And one thing I know about settling in days, like it takes a collaboration of the parent, collaboration of the settings team and the child to make that settling in process work. You know, the first day that the child and the parents come into the setting, you know, they may sit down for 1 to 2 hours to fill out some paperwork, sign up fully. And the child then is allowed to freely explore the environment. And figure out if they like the setting or not. And the parents are then, you know, making the same decisions as well. Parents are entrusting us, they who they do not know, with their most precious possession. We must not blame or judge them for being anxious, but soothe their fears with good practice and empathy. I'll say it again. Parents are entrusting us, they who they do not know, with their most precious possession, but we must not blame or judge them for being anxious, but soothe their fears with good practice and empathy. As children are settling in, parents are transitioning too. And some may handle this transitioning period easier than others because they'll just come in, put their child down and say bye and go. But some parents find it hard. They struggle. And it's for us to make them feel comfortable, to engage with them and reassure them that their child will be okay. And that's why it's important to have a key person, a familiar face for when the parents drop off their child, and a familiar face for when their parents collect their child again, and a first point of call, you know, someone that they can talk to, get information if their child's falling over or they want to know about their child's learning, and just a way to keep, you know, that feedback consistent. The key person will get to know that child personally and the family personally, but professionally. And often the key person is selected by the child. The key person helps with transitioning the child initially in the room where they start, and helps with the transitioning to the next room and the introduction to the new key person, sharing relevant information and, you know, just helping, reassuring the child that they'll be fine. And this is why it's important to have a diverse range, as I said in the beginning, of people in your workforce, you know, people that your child can connect to, people that your child can relate to. The key person will give descriptive, authentic, and organic feedback, which is so important throughout your child's life at nursery. You know, often you'll find that practitioners, educators, childminders, whoever, will give feedback, say, your child's fine, your child's okay, had a brilliant day, bye mum, bye dad. It's important that we're honest. It's important that the feedback is balanced. It's important that it's simplistic, but straight to the point and accessible, you know, because like a lot of parents may not be computer literate or have a computer at home, or maybe literate in general. So we need to, or speak your language. So it's important that we're able to give feedback in a way that is accessible to all. And the difficulties with feedback often is we don't want to be the bringer of bad news. Often we don't have the time because there may be like 6 or 7 parents there at the same time. Maybe there might be problems with the internet, who knows? But it's imperative and it's important that we give feedback to our parents so they know that their child, where their child is at in their learning, what their child's doing doing during the day or during the week or the month and so forth. And making sure, you know, that the feedback is balanced is something that people struggle with, you know, making sure that, you know, we're giving a bit of learning, we're telling them a bit about the day, but also taking time out to ask parents how they are and how they're feeling too, because they're part of this journey, this learning process. And through that, you're able to build bonds with your parents, and develop that parent partnership. And it's important that we create opportunities to give feedback. It's important that we engage with parents purposefully. And it's important, even though it's COVID right now, that we invite parents into our settings so they can see what their child's been up to, what kind of things you've been doing in the setting, what kind of projects you've been working on and so far. Obviously, things like Zoom are really good if parents are computer literate, or even pictures of the environment. Often we take pictures of the child, what they're doing, like the activities that they're doing, but take pictures of your displays and share them, or even bring your tablets out and show the parents the actual tablet with the actual photo of what their child's doing. Make your parents feel a part of the process, you know, and involve parents in that learning experience so they can do something at home with the same things that you've been doing in the setting at home, because it's important to build bonds and it's important to maintain those parent partnerships, you know. And these parent partnerships should be built on respect, first of all, respect, regardless of what background they come from, what they look like, how they speak, how they dress, even how they smell. There needs to be a foundation of respect, be professional at all times, and care for their child, care for the child, and care for the parents also, and be empathetic, but be honest, because honesty is definitely the best policy, and be consistent. And here's a quote from Jane D. Hull. Jane D. Hull says, at the end of the day, the most overwhelming key to a child's success is the positive involvement of parents. I'll say it again. At the end of the day, the most overwhelming key to a child's success is the positive involvement of parents, of their parents. So how do we involve parents in the learning process? Well, by having a parent-centered approach, so knowing your parents. Just like we have a child-centered approach, we need to know our parents, what their background is, what their difficulties are, their challenges are, and support them. We need to have clear set boundaries. As I said before, be empathetic, have emotional intelligence, and understanding that parents, I've said it before, are not cash cows. They're parents, yeah? And they're part of the learning process. And having overall good customer service skills, I feel like that's something that should be part of the annual training, customer service skills, because often that's something that gets missed. All right, here's a provocation question for everybody to think about and reflect on. Do we, the CEOs, educators, practitioners, leaders, PVIs, that's private voluntary independent nurseries, childminders, nannies, and mainstream nurseries / settings see parents as cash cows or as co-educators? Do we value the money they bring to our settings more than the children that come into our care? Can we reflect and check ourselves? And the last bit of this is, can we agree that our parents are as important as the children in our care? And can we agree that when connections are maintained, our parent partnerships are maintained, we all benefit. That's the parents, the educators, and the child. And parent engagement helps to keep our children's learning, care, and experience consistent. And my 6 parental engagement tips are: 1, use simplistic terms. 2, keep parents involved digitally by word of mouth, Zoom, or use apps. 3, understand parents are transitioning to. 4, parent events, not only because of annual, those annual themed events that nurseries do and settings do. Forget all of that. Create some events that are genuinely just for your parents. And 5, create time for parents. And 6, keep feedback balanced. Blessings and love. I'm Jamel C Campbell.
Jamal, thank you so much. And thank you, everyone. We've had loads of questions come in whilst you were speaking, Jamal. So we're now gonna go over to a little bit of Q&A. I guess just to say, for anyone that hasn't posted a question already, there is a Q&A function. You can throw them in. We've had some people also send them directly through. So Jamal, I'm going to kick us off with a question came through which said, you talked quite a lot about when parents first come along and you have that first interaction. And what about the parents who don't come along? So, for example, the mum comes in and does the transition days on her own and drops the child off, but you don't see that dad and you don't have that first interaction. Any thought about those?
Yeah, just don't assume that they ain't there. That's the first thing. And create events that that will encourage the other parent to come in, be it another mom, another dad, auntie, uncle, whoever's the primary carer, create events, encourage them to come in when they've got time. And as I said before, make time, because often some parents may be working a full-time job and not able to come in, or they might just be a little apprehensive of coming into a setting, so it's about encouraging those parents to come in and creating moments where they can come in.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and one of the things that I know definitely for schools, and whether it's true for settings as much, I'd be interested in your thoughts, is that some parents can find the actual thought of going to that building, like particularly if they've been to the same school themselves and they've got all that negative connotations about the teacher and that sort of thing, they can find like the pure building quite a threatening thing. And so there's like other opportunities to get out into communities to meet parents, I guess, on their own terms slightly more.
Yeah, well, I know from working in schools that we've done like a lot of like home visits and things like that. Sometimes it's better to see a parent within their own environment, because that's where they feel comfortable. And I've actually learned that during this time of COVID, the parents that we did engage with like via Zoom and so on, it was beautiful to see, them at home, the child at home engaging with the parents, and how you just how they are being actually them. Because in a setting, the parent and the child is different in a setting to the way that they are at home. And, it's just a beautiful thing to see.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So the next question we had in was around the preconceptions. So you talked about managing preconceptions, and just because they're a Black dad, don't think this of them, or however they see or even smell. And I guess the question is, if you had any advice for how to manage those preconceptions. I guess it's quite a human thing to judge people on first sight, whether we sort of want to or not. And any advice for practitioners on how to manage those preconceptions?
Just give them a chance, man. Give them a chance. Because even with myself, like there's been times where I've walked in settings and I've been asked, "Are you lost?" And I'm like, "Yo, I'm a senior. Like I'm a consultant." "What? You're a consultant? How can you be a consultant? You don't look like you don't fit." And I'm like, "What do you mean I don't fit? Google me, please, humbly Google me." And they'll be like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry." And then we'll engage in a conversation about the early years, about child development. And they'll be like, "Wow, you really do know your stuff." So it's about giving people a chance, you know what I mean? And listening, just listen, learn, listen again, then act, trust me, take those steps, because you could be doing someone a real injustice that doesn't deserve it.
Absolutely. The next question was around these anxious parents. So you said that, you might get parents in for whom handing over their child on that first day is, I guess it's a huge thing for all parents, but some parents may be particularly anxious, and just any advice you've got for how to, the best thing to do with anxious parents on those sort of first days and how to help settle that.
I'll say, like, for the first couple of days or couple of moments, I would say work at their speed. Work at their speed, because this is new to them, just like it's new to their child. And sometimes it can be annoying when a parent's hanging around outside the classroom and they're setting off their child. These times their child's settled. The child stopped crying. Then they've turned around, looked at the door. Mummy's still there. Ah! They start crying. It's like, oh, man. So it's about encouraging them and telling them, look, and actually telling them that you're settling too. Are you aware that? Are you aware of this? Because a lot of parents are not aware of that. They're just feeling anxious and feeling alone and feeling that no one doesn't understand them. But as practitioners, educators, and so on, we see this regularly. We see this all the time. So it's just ensuring them you're not alone. This is not new, a new way of feeling, and supporting them and telling them that the quicker you hand off your child, the quicker they'll settle, and you'll feel better for it afterwards. And then also taking pictures of the child when the child settles in and they're playing and so on, sending it to the parent or showing them when the parent comes in. They're like, oh my gosh, they're sitting down drawing, or they're sitting down playing with blocks, or they're playing with the other children. They've made friends, and it will give them a little bit of relief as well.
Every parent just wants the best for their child at the end of the day, right? When they want a child to be safe, they want the child to be happy. And yeah, absolutely. The next question's hopefully quite a simple one. It said, could you repeat your top tips and reflection question, please?
Yeah, yeah, I will do. Okay.
Jamal's 6 top tips.
Okay, so this is the reflection question. Do we, the CEOs, educators, practitioners, leaders, private voluntary, independent nurseries, childminders, nannies, and mainstream nurseries / settings see parents as cash cows or as co-educators? Do we value the money they bring to our settings more than the children that come into our care? Can we reflect and check ourselves? And then my 6 top tips are: use simplistic terms, keep parents informed digitally by word of mouth, Zoom, apps, and etc. So that could be pictures and so on. Understand parents are transitioning too. Hold parent events, not only annual themed events. So that's like Black History Month or Halloween or Christmas, Valentine's Day, and all that malarkey. And create time for parents and keep feedback balanced. Yeah.
And that keeping feedback balanced thing, I think, speaks to the cash cow question you asked. And are they being seen as a customer and a paying customer we need to keep happy, or are they being seen as something more in their child's life?
Yeah. No, and that's it. I've seen it. Like, I see it time and time again, and they are paying, but at the same time, this is not a holding bay. They're not just paying for their child to be in a nursery so they can go and work or do what they want to do. They're being put in a nursery for their child to be educated.
Do you see any difference in, because obviously not all parents are paying at all points of the different settings, so do you see any difference where they are and where they aren't?
Yeah, you do see there is a difference, but at the same time, when you're getting those funded children in, they're filling spaces, they're filling seats, they're holding seats, and I think it's a numbers game at the end of the day. In the treatment, sometimes I feel like that the paying parents are more valued, and I feel like a lot of settings are more flexible because they're paying. So there's that part of things.
It's sad because at the end of the day, when you put the children at the heart of it, those children that aren't paying are the most vulnerable, the ones we care about most in many ways. So the next question, what have I got here, was I was around children with additional support needs, and if you had any thoughts particularly on working with parents and supporting parental engagement where the children have additional support needs.
Yes, and I've actually done a presentation about feedback to parents for children with particular needs, and working in I just came from working in a specialist school for like the last 3 years. I've actually just recently left, I think it was in April. So anyway, when it comes to children with additional needs, the parents, vast majority, are so anxious because in ways they blame themselves for their child's disability. Some even think that with time their child will grow out of their needs, their disabilities, and so on. And it's just about reassuring them that as much as it's a disability, it's a normality in sense, you know, and that their child is learning at the best they can, and their child is developing at the best rate they can. And all we can do is support them, give them the relevant provisions, and make sure that learning is inclusive and accessible at all levels. If it's through communication devices, if it's through different ICT resources or flashcards and so on, there is always a way to support the child's learning, and there's always a way for parents to obtain those same provisions at home. We need to reassure parents that they're not teachers, you know. So if the things that are working within the setting and not at home, it's not their fault, you know. So when I was doing the Zoom sessions with my class, my class of 9, and some of the parents couldn't do the sessions, we were understandable. Like my team and we contacted them, we sent resources. Some resources were even hand delivered, you know, to our families. So it is difficult with supporting children with SEND, because they don't have all of the equipment that we have in a setting, like the interactive boards and so on. But all parents can do is do their best, and all teachers can do is give over the resources and give some sort of support, you know, especially during this time of COVID, because a lot of the parents like are 10 times as much more anxious about bringing their children into a setting. And some of them are like, they were so stressed out because they see, you know, the child attending the setting as a form of respite. And yeah, so it's just, there's so many levels to it, so many levels.
And so much, like it's not easy for practitioners working with children with additional needs. Like it requires extra support and training.
Yeah, it does. And being physically present, you know?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Around the support and training issue, I guess, do you feel that there's enough training for practitioners around how to work with parents and how to support parental engagement in the early years? And if not, I guess, what can be done to change that?
Yeah, I think it's just, there's so much layers to that. So basically, you know, it all comes from like the whole misconception part of things. Just understanding your local community, your wider community. There's anti-racist practice, you know, the fact that discrimination is made even before parents come into the setting. You know, as I said, Black dads, you know, are often judged as not being there and not being part of the process, not being in their children's lives, which is a definite lie. But, you know, this is what's being pushed out into the media. Black people are dehumanized, and other races too, you know, are seen as the bottom of the bottom, may I say. So I think there's more training overall that needs to be done with interaction of people. So that's on site, interaction like team-wise, managers, CEOs, they need to be trained. Anti-racist practice policies need to be put in place. Inclusive policies need to be put in place. And when we clean up our settings, then we can work on the engagement with our communities, the engagement with our families. If the setting's not tuned in, then how can we then, you know, have an impact on our wider community?
You mentioned earlier, I think it was 0.1% of early years practitioners are Black males. What can be done? We had a question come in. How can we increase representation in the early years? Like, what can be done to address it?
Well, it's zero. So it's 0.3, between 0.3 and 0.5% are Black men. Yeah. So what can we do to balance out the workforce is making, like, I think there's the wider question is, how can we raise the status of the early years itself? Because the early years is not seen as real work. I interviewed a lady today, and she was saying that, like, the early years is just play based. And I was like, yeah, play is, you know, one of the foundations, but there's so much behind it. There's so much theory that supports why play is good for, you know, building those foundations and developing our children in the 7 areas of learning. And she was like, wow, you taught me something today. So I think that the early years in itself, man, we don't get looked upon highly. And when men look at it, you know, especially providers, Black men, they're looking at it as that's like, how am I going to provide for my family, you know, on that low salary? But I tell you now, if you're a man that has a nurturing side, you're fun, and you care for children, and you want to help build the next generation, you want to help develop the next generation, early years is definitely for you, man. So join. And that's why I'm still here. I've been here 19 plus years, going on 20 years this September, in early years, and I'm still pushing, man, and I'm still representing, you know, being that advocate and showing men that look like me, with hair like me, 6 foot, gold tooth, Black face, and not black face being painted on, an actual Black man, that they can do this work, you know. So that's how, yeah.
Thanks so much, Jamal. If you're happy to stay with us, then we'll have Q&As with Suma and Janet, and if there's questions that link in or people keep asking you questions, then we'll come back to you. If that's okay. That's
cool. And people sign up to the Early Years Blacklist, subscribe to the newsletter, the Early Years Blacklist. It's on Twitter, it's on Instagram. It's a brilliant platform that acknowledges all, like, Black professionals in early years in education and so on. Blessings to you.
Thanks so much, Jamal. Next, we are going to Janet. So Janet Goodall is an associate professor in the School of Education at Swansea University. Her main area of research is around family and parental engagement in young people's learning. She's researched, written and lectured widely about parental engagement, working with schools, families, local authorities and charity bodies in the UK and further afield. Most recent book was co-authored with Dr. Catherine Weston and was the 100 Ideas for Secondary Teachers in Engaging Parents. And we've just seen a version of it in, I've forgotten the language, is it Indonesian? It's being translated into languages around the world, I'm very sure. And follows on from the previous book, 100 Ideas for Primary Teachers on Engaging Parents as well, both from Bloomsbury Education. When I mentioned that I did a master's in education looking at parental engagement, a lot of it was Janet's research. And when I speak to other people, lots of them are also based in Janet's research. So yeah, really pleased to hand over to you, Janet. And I meant to say before Jamal's as well, any questions, please keep firing them in the chat and the Q&A throughout, and we will ask Janet at the end. Thanks, Janet.
With luck, this should be shared. I'm hoping you can see the shared screen. Can you see the shared screen?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Hello, and I'm really pleased to be here this afternoon. Where I am is South Wales, but I'm pleased to be with you digitally. And I've been asked to talk about what parental engagement actually is and why it's important. Because so often people say, oh, we've got great parental engagement, but when you dig down, what they mean is they get a reasonable number of their parents into school. And we've just heard so eloquently from Jamel that that's not what it's about. It's about the interactions that actually take place. So first off, what I want to look at is, what is parental engagement? What does it actually mean? What do some of the terms mean that we use around this idea? And the first term that I want to look at is parents. When I say parents, what I want you to hear is an adult with a significant caring responsibility for the child. That's far too long to keep saying, so I'm going to keep saying parents. But it could be a parent, it could be a foster carer, it could be a grandparent, it could be another member of the family, it could be a youth worker, it could be a sports coach. It's someone who has a significant caring responsibility for that child or that young person. And we need to think more widely than we do. And this is a point, again, that Jamel made, but it's important to say it again. Parents aren't just on the demand side of learning. So often in schooling, parents are seen as kind of adjuncts to the learning process. As a good middle-class mother, I wandered down to school when my eldest was about to start school and said, well, what shall I teach him? I was told in no uncertain terms to teach him absolutely nothing, that was the job of the school. Now, I'd already messed up because I'd taught him to walk and I'd taught him to talk and interact with other people. The family around him had taught him all of these things. Parents aren't just on the demand side of learning. Parents have been involved in young people's learning from the very first moment they encountered those young people, whether that's at birth or a later point. And you think about the first thing that you say to a newborn baby, whether it's hello or I'm your mum or a religious phrase, whatever it is, that child is learning and that child is taking in everything. A 5-year-old's favorite word is always why. You know, what are they interested in? Parents have been answering that question for as long as a child has been posing it. Parents are an integral part of the supply side of education and need to be recognized as such. So why should we care about parental engagement with learning or engaging parents with learning? Well, Tom's already shown you the data from the Institute of Fiscal Studies. The research is really, really clear that this is an important area. And for me, from my point of view, the reason I'm so passionate about it is I think this is an issue of social justice. We have a school system that does not treat our children equally and doesn't prepare our children equally, doesn't allow all of our children to come to their best possible selves. So if we were together, I would ask you now to turn to the person next to you and try to guess how many children in the UK live in poverty. Unfortunately, that number is at least 4 million. And I say at least because the sense coming out from research now is that COVID has had an effect on this and that more children than ever actually live in poverty. But that's almost a third of our kids. So in a classroom of 30 children, 10 of those children may not have had enough to eat. They may not have stable accommodation. They may not have warm clothes. And that needs to be taken into account. We need to be thinking about those children. It's already been mentioned about how we can make life more difficult for parents facing challenges. We need to not do that and think more clearly. We know that children growing up in poverty, you know this as well as I do, are 6 times more likely to leave school without qualifications. It's not the qualifications that's the issue there. It's the knock-on effect of not having those qualifications that leads to the differences in life expectancy. They're more likely to leave school early, and according to the older research, are likely to have lower aspirations. The older research is wrong. If you ask families across the economic spectrum, they all have very high aspirations for their children. They want their children to do as well as possible in the society that we live in. However, what a lot of families don't have is the scaffolding to make those aspirations come true. So it's not about having low aspirations. And I've put in that blue box there's a paper by Professor Morag Trainer. Can we put the myth of the poverty of aspirations to bed now? It's freely accessible and it's easy to read. And so often you hear people in schools say, oh, we know what that kind of parent is like. They don't care what their kids do. They don't value education. Yes, they do care what their kids do. Yes, they do value education, but they may not know how to make those aspirations that they hold come to reality. That's part of our job. But we know that there are links between educational underachievement and poverty and everything that goes along with it. And the reason I'm interested in this is because I think parental engagement can help mitigate some of those problems for this generation and the next one. Will parental engagement in learning solve child poverty? No, it won't. Can parental engagement in children's learning help children achieve and lead to a more equitable society? Yeah. Yes, it can. And that's been shown fairly often through the research. And interestingly, a lot of this research goes back 25, 30, 40 years. We've known this a long time. We just haven't put it into place. And we need to change that. What you see on the screen now is a quote from Professor Kathy Silva and her team at the University of Oxford. What they were looking at, very appropriately for this conference, was whether or not having an experience, an organized educational experience before they went to school had a beneficial effect on young children throughout primary school. And not surprisingly, they found it did. But they also found what's on the screen now, that for all children, it was the quality of the home learning environment that made a difference. It wasn't about parental occupation, it wasn't about education, and it wasn't about income. And it's precisely the same sort of thing that Jamel was just saying. You need to stop thinking about that kind of parent and start thinking, this parent loves this child. What parents do is more important than who parents are. So there are a number of things I'm going to ask you to stop doing, a number of things I'm going to ask you to start doing, but one of them is a phrase I would like you to jettison, which is that kind of parent. What can you expect from that kind of parent? You can expect that they love their child and want the best for them. And actually, so do you. And that's where we start parental partnership. But what do I mean by this term parental engagement? Because it's one of these terms that people use all the time, and everybody means something slightly differently. Parental engagement is not getting parents into the school and setting. It's not a bad thing to do, but it's kind of like looking up something on Wikipedia. It's not a bad place to start, but it's a very bad place to finish. Kind of like reading a scientific report in the newspaper. That will tell you some of what was said, but it won't tell you as much as the actual report. Getting parents in is not parental engagement. Giving parents information is not parental engagement. It's important, but it's not the end. It's a step on a journey. It's not the end of the journey. It's also not about upskilling parents. Can you see the implicit power idea that's there? Jamel mentioned power, and it's really important. How am I supposed to upskill a parent? I'm extremely proud of my children. They're adults, they're contributing to society, but I wouldn't pretend that I'm someone who can upskill other parents. I can talk to them. I can tell them about, oh yeah, mine did that as well. It's okay, it'll be all right. But it's not about educating parents on how to be parents. It's about supporting them to engage with learning. It's also not about blaming parents. Children misbehave in school. Sometimes it can be related to parents, and sometimes, often it can't. And it's not about blaming parents for that disparity that Tom mentioned at the beginning. Effective parental engagement, and this is all based on the literature, takes place outside of school. You will not see effective parental engagement unless you visit people in their homes, and home visiting is an excellent idea. I realize there are issues with it, particularly around COVID. But it's the interaction between parents and young people, between parents and babies, parents and toddlers, parents and teenagers. It changes as young people grow up. And an example of that is parents helping with homework seems to be particularly effective in primary, and it doesn't seem to be particularly effective in secondary school. Now, that may be because parents in secondary tend to get involved when children are already struggling, but the research seems to show that it's much better for secondary parents to work on the things like independence and building up self-esteem and self-belief. We know that reading with children in primary and early years, and by early years in terms of reading with children, I mean from birth, from that very first day, reading with children is beneficial. High expectations, academic encouragement, and praise for performance and effort are really beneficial as children age. So if you've got teenagers, it's that last line, and I've given you the citation there. And what that group of authors did was look at almost all of the research and try to tease out the really important messages. So why haven't we been supporting this sort of engagement? Well, I'm very pleased to have followed on from Jamel because he sort of set the groundwork for what I'm going to say now. And we have some real systemic issues. For one, teachers are often poorly or not trained to work with parents, and I am not blaming teachers here. I am saying that I'm asking teachers to do something for which they're not trained. That's not fair. And it's something that we as educators, we as anybody with any influence on policy really needs to address. I think we have an incredibly professional, incredibly highly trained workforce in the UK, but we're asking them to do something we haven't trained them to do, and that's not fair. We also know that involved parents are often unrepresentative of the parent body. Parents who come into school, this has again already been mentioned, parents who are comfortable coming into school to read with children or whatever, are likely to be the same socioeconomic status as the teachers. They're likely to feel comfortable in school settings. Not everybody feels comfortable in school. For a lot of parents, school is a scary place. And Jamel's asked us to reflect on things. And one of the things I would like us to all reflect on is the fact that many of us are really comfortable in schools and settings. We had never really left them. That is not what the rest of the population does. The rest of the population left school behind, many of them very glad to leave it behind. And we need to realize that not everybody is comfortable coming into a school setting or an earlier setting. And we have really pervasive stereotypes of groups of parents, this culture of poverty discourse that Jamel's talked about. When you look at a parent, are you judging them already? What you should be judging them is the fact that they love their child and they want the best for their child. That's the foundation of everything else I'm trying to say. We need to ring the changes. We need to change things. We need to change some of the terms. We need to change some of the discourse, and we need to change the messages that we're giving people and change some of the practices, but not discard what we've learned. And COVID has been horrific, but I think there are some silver linings. So when I say change the discourse, what do I actually mean? Well, we talked about an achievement gap, but Lanston Billings talks about an educational debt. And I think she's onto something, because what she's saying is we need to stop looking at individual children and say that child isn't measuring up, that child has a gap in achievement, and start looking at all of us and saying, as a society, we have failed that child. We have an obligation to all of our children under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child to provide an adequate education for all of our children. And as a society, we're not doing that. So the movement to an idea of an educational debt removes the emphasis on the child and puts the emphasis on all of us. And in some ways, I realize I'm speaking to the converted here. You've given up an afternoon to come and listen about how to make life better for young people. I'm speaking to the converted, but we still need to examine our own practice and our own understandings. It's not just that children don't achieve, but that we as a society aren't fulfilling our obligations to them. And we need to change some of the terms. Tom's already highlighted that he knew I was going to do this. I don't know how many times Tom has seen this, but I'm hoping that it will permeate beyond this group. Learning is a lifelong process. From the very first moment you're born, you are learning. I hope you're learning now and learning today. I've taken notes already from what I've heard, and it goes on throughout the rest of the life course. It's a lifelong thing, and it's a very wide thing. Within that, there's a smaller group of education, and education is learning with rules or learning that is organized. So a scout troop has elements of learning in it. Musical lessons have elements of learning. Sports lessons have elements of education in them because it's intentional learning and it's got rules around it. Within learning and education, ideally, sits schooling. The problem is we confuse those last two terms. We talk about education when we actually mean schooling, and that's one of the reasons that we shut parents out, because we think, oh, education is about what happens in these walls or with these interactions. But education is much, much wider, and learning is wider still, and we need to reflect on those terms. We need to change the emphasis. We need to move away from thinking about schools to start thinking about learning. And if you have any authority in your school or setting, I would challenge you to change your school or nursery improvement plan to a learning improvement plan. Because really, do you want to improve the organization, or do you want to improve the learning that goes on in the organization? Because the organization exists for learning. And I would very much like to get to a situation where everybody's learning is at the center of what we're doing. So the community's learning, the parents learning, the pupils learning, and the schools learning, and the school staff learning. If you've taken time out from your duties as a teacher or an assistant today, do the parents that you work with know that? Are you going to share this with them? And if not, why not? It's modeling lifelong learning. Isn't that something we want to model for all the people we interact with? The desire to support learning is at the center of everything we do. And it's just about foregrounding that. And I think we really need to change the pandemic discourse. I don't know about anybody else, but I am fed up with hearing about lost learning. Where's it gone? You know, if I lose my keys, they are somewhere. Where has all this learning gone? But more importantly, how do we know it was lost? And how do we know what was lost? There are a lot of papers and reports being written, but a lot of them are doing one of two things. They're either saying, well, children would have been in school 8 hours and they've only spent 3 hours in front of a screen, therefore they've lost 5 hours of learning. Really? If you were sitting next to me, I could teach you something in 10 minutes, or you could teach me something in 10 minutes that might take an hour in a classroom where there are 30 other people. We don't know that that works as an equivalent. Or they're basing ideas on learning that has been lost over teacher strikes or other healthcare issues, but we've never been through anything like what we've just been through. And the idea that children were losing learning, yes, of course they've lost some things, but they've also gained a lot of things. And the assumption that schools have been closed is another unhelpful term. We assume that learning has been lost because it wasn't in school, and that's because we assume there's an unbreakable connection between school and education. As I've just said, there really isn't. We assume that this is learning and that this isn't. Is that true? Think of all the things that you can learn. Just because children haven't been in the physical place of school doesn't mean they haven't been in school, and it doesn't mean they haven't been in learning. We talk about schools being closed as though this were the school. And I would like to point out that I think that's down the road from my grandmother's house, and that this isn't the school. I've been in hundreds of schools. I've been very privileged to be in schools around the world. And every time I've been in a school, I've been told that the school is actually the community of people. It's not the building. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to have a forest school. You wouldn't be able to have a school trip. The school is not the building, it's the community, and the communities have not been closed. And teachers have gone above and beyond to fulfill the learning for their children. Looking to the future, are there some silver linings we can take? I think there are. And one of the things we can take is there's an increased understanding from what we can see coming out. There's an increased understanding between parents and school staff, and also an understanding that sometimes school staff are parents. We talk about them as they're different groups, but they're not. They're highly overlapping bits of a Venn diagram. We've also learned a great deal about online tools. I don't know about you, but a year and a half ago, I had no idea what Zoom was, yet now I use it 3 or 4 times a day. We use it for teaching, we use it for learning, we use it for meetings, we use it for supporting parents and supporting young people. And we have an increased understanding of the importance of the role that parents play and can play and should play in children's learning. Silver lining? I think there are some, and we mustn't lose those. I said this a few years ago. If you think of a school or a nursery or a setting as a backpack with places to put carabiners, we've run out of attachment points. If I say to you, here are 5 new things I want you to do, I probably need to give you 6 things that you can stop doing. So my question to you, my challenge to you is not, here are 5 new things I want you to do, but I want you to examine the things you are doing. How much of them relate to learning? If you're doing things that don't relate to learning, why are you doing them? You exist for learning as a setting or a school. We need to change the messages. And the message we need to get across to parents is a really simple one. What matters is that they care about their children and they care about their learning. That's easy, they do. The vast majority of parents do. Parents don't need to know the answers. One of the things you find as your children age, and my children are adults now, is that when they were very little, I could answer the questions, most of them. But as they got older, I couldn't. My son's first comment to his first teacher in school was, Do you know how the electricity gets to the light bulb from the wall switch? Because my mummy doesn't. That set me up as a parent. It's not important whether parents know the answers and know how the electricity gets to the light bulb. What's important is parents say, no, I don't know either. How do you think we could find out? Where could we look it up? It's about supporting the search and supporting the learning. We need to change the messages as well. The message to staff, what matters is that parents engage in learning, not that they come into school. And start from what you have in common. What you have in common is a desire for the best for the children that you care for, and the desire to support the learning of the young person. What we need is targeted, responsive, culturally appropriate support for parental engagement with learning. And you cannot do that unless you know your parents. What Jamel was saying at the beginning, you need to know your parents. You need to know what they want and what they need. We need to design these things in conjunction with parents, school staff, young people, and researchers. With so often school staff say to me, well, we put things on for parents and they didn't come. But did you ask the parents if that's what they wanted? And when I say researchers, I don't just mean people like me. Obviously, I do mean people like me, but anybody in your school or setting or friends group or family that's doing any later study, like Tom was doing his MA, they're learning the research skills that will help you implement new ideas and evaluate new ideas. If you don't evaluate what you're doing, how do you know what you should keep doing and what you should stop doing? There are some other resources that I would suggest, and this goes back to what Tom was saying at the very beginning. The cost of the school day toolkit is a fantastic toolkit for any school or setting to look at, to see where all the hidden costs are. Where are you actually disadvantaging families? And the same with poverty proofing the school day. I said at the very beginning, and I'm coming back to it at the very end, that I think this is an issue of social justice. And this picture on the screen, which is in the Creative Commons, the author has said anyone can use it. In the first image, you've got equality and everybody gets the same size box. And if you're my height, which is quite short, you spend a lot of time asking people to reach things for you. My son occasionally shows up to do tall person things for me. In the second image, you've got equity, which is just about, I think, where we're getting to, or certainly where we're trying to get through in our education system at the moment, in our schooling system at the moment, where people are given what they need. What I'm aiming for is liberation, which is the final one, where we no longer need boxes to stand on because the barrier's gone away in the first place. That's what I'm aiming for. It's a long road. It's not going to happen in my lifetime, but we can all make as many contributions to it as we can. Because really, this is what we're after. We're after happy families. We're after children that are learning and living up to their potential. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Janet. And floods of questions coming in, as always when we speak. I've been on a few calls with Janet, and she normally stirs people to at least question their own practice, etc. So the first one was around what you were talking about aspirations and the question, sorry, I'll get the exact wording. You mentioned it's not an issue of low aspirations, but a lack of scaffolding. Could you elaborate a bit on what the scaffolding is specifically?
Yes, for example, I used to live on a council estate outside of Bath. There are 2 areas of significant deprivation outside near Bath, which you wouldn't think, but there are. And most of the kids that were growing up on that estate didn't know anybody who'd ever filled in a UCAS form. They didn't know anybody who'd ever been to university, other than the 2 of us, and we were those nice people who were inept. That's the sort of scaffolding I need. How do you fill in a UCAS form? How do you know what options to choose at GCSE? How do you start talking to your 5, 6, 12-year-old about what university could be like if you've never been to university? That's the sort of scaffolding that we need. And university, of course, is not the only outcome. But if we don't provide information for parents, and Parent Power is a wonderful example of that. It's a project at King's University, King's College London, where basically they're helping parents find out what parents want to know about supporting their children. So it's that kind of scaffolding, not just UCAS, but all of the questions that young children and parents want to have. And also, as Jamel says, showing young children that there are different ways of doing it. You can be a Black man in early years. There aren't many of them, but you can.
Thanks so much. You mentioned Parent Power there. It's a great initiative. They've now rolled out across Oldham and are just moving to the Fenlands. If any of the people on the call are in those areas, look out for them. I think they're mostly secondary focused, but the parents obviously have children of all different ages, so it doesn't have to be secondary focused. The next question was around, you talked about it's not about upskilling parents, and who are you to upskill a parent? And the question was simply, are there parents who lack the necessary skills to support their child? And so what do you think?
Yes, if you're expecting parents to know what a number line is or know what a fronted adverbial is, please don't ask me what a fronted adverbial is. Yes. If you're asking parents to say to their child, I'm really proud of you. If you're asking parents to say to their child, no, I don't know what the answer is. I know that was challenging. I'm really proud of you for working on it. Most parents are able to do that, but they may not realize how important it is. And there's a difference between ability and knowing it's important. One of the things that I complain about frequently is we have a more or less universal offer of antenatal care before children are born, which is great, and we should have. But I don't know about you. I know Tom is a new parent. I found being pregnant much easier than I found actually raising them. And we need support around new parents as well. We need support around parents saying, yeah, you really should be reading to your child before they can read. This is what turn taking is, and that will help your child.
That links really nice to the next question, which was, they said that all three of us have talked about the importance of parents, but do parents know how important they are? And if not, how can we help them to do so?
I'm laughing because I should have a copy of a book called Do Parents Know They Matter, which was what I'm one of the authors. No, often parents don't know they matter. And many parents from disadvantaged groups really don't know they matter because they've been told they don't matter. Very young parents have been told they aren't capable or whatever. One of the things we need to do is tell parents, you matter, you can have an effect, and that's one of the reasons I showed that quote from Kathy Silva and her team. It's not about parental education. Yes, we know there's a correlation. If a mother has a degree, the child is more likely to do well in education, but that's correlation, not causation. We can break that cycle. We can make it so that parents who haven't had a success in the educational system or the schooling system can have children who do have a success. And it's about letting parents know what will actually be useful for them.
Thank you, Janet. The next couple of questions I would tie together. So Susan said, is it possible to get a copy of the slides? And they are going to be on the Tapestry website afterwards from all of our different talks. And Jamal didn't use slides, but has a presentation that will also be shared. But then the next question that links to that was, where can settings and schools find high quality parental engagement training? You talked about the lack of, we're asking teachers to do something they're not trained to do.
I'm going to be very academic and say read my books, but I think what you need to be doing, I'm not able to endorse any particular form of training, but I think one of the things you need to be doing is talking to your local authority or talking to your providers, talking to the people that run an academy, if you're part of an academy chain, and say, this is really important. This will help our children. This will help our young people. This will help our staff. And talk to them, look beyond. I'm not really able to say there are some very, very good organizations out there, many of which were on that slide that you shared at the beginning, Tom.
Sorry, struggling to unmute. Absolutely. The other bit I wanted to add is, and excuse me for not knowing quite how the overlap between early years practitioners and the MPQs, but there's a new MPQ framework coming out, and for the first time, it's got a really sort of meaty section there about parental engagement in children's learning. And I think, Janet, you were involved in the sort of drafting of it, and it's really, as I read it, I was surprised how much it aligns with the sort of messages that we're all saying here around parental engagement. And that MPQ framework will be being used in all training of middle leaders, senior leaders, head teachers, etc., across the country going forwards. And so one of the strands they'll have to be trained about is effective parental engagement in children's learning. So I would say perhaps more training is on its way that is aligned to some of these messages if you're not already accessing it through the MPQs. The next question was, so about the education debt, which always raised questions. I don't know if it's a simple question to answer, but the question was, what needs to happen in order to address the education debt?
Society needs to be reformed from the inside out. Not a big sort of thing. To actually deal with the education debt, we need to realize that education and schooling don't operate outside of the rest of society. So addressing issues of discrimination, addressing issues of poverty, it's all part of a piece. And I am not saying that that's down to teachers to do. I know teachers are often feel like they're told that they need to fix the ills of society. It's not down to teachers to do alone. It's down to teachers to do as part of a society, but we need to address all of that. In terms of addressing it in schools, I don't think we could do better than listening to what Jamel said at the beginning. Look to ourselves, look at the opinions we have of people, look at the practices we have, and look at some of those resources that I showed you and constantly question, why am I doing this? What effect is this going to have? Is this leading toward liberation and freedom, or is this leading away from those?
Similarly, someone asked about the liberation and what does liberation look like for the UK education system?
What is it? I wouldn't dare to say what the UK, there isn't one. Of course, I'm operating in a different education system than you are in England and then my colleagues in Scotland are. I don't think we can liberate the education system outside of liberating the rest of it. And we shouldn't have an education system or a schooling system that is separate from society. So one of the things it would look like would be we would get rid of a gap between children from well-off homes and children who aren't from well-off homes. And some countries have accomplished that. There are countries where you can't look at a child's outcome and make a pretty good guess about their family background. The UK is not one of those countries.
Related to that, we've gone very big, and this question hopefully brings us back a little bit towards an individual setting. What can we in our setting do to start evaluating our work with parents?
Keep records, the first thing. So if you have an event for parents, write down what it was, keep the materials. If we were all together, I would ask you to hold up your hands if you have a house full of empty loo rolls and yogurt pots, because we're teachers and we're pack rats. And I have a house full of that, and they don't let me work with anybody under doctoral students anymore, and they don't want to play with those. Keep really good records. You keep your teaching materials, keep your materials that you use with parents. Go back 3 months later and find out from staff, find out from parents, did that have an effect? As a matter of fact, I'd like you to open your diaries if you've got them with you and write down for the last week of term, what am I doing because of that Tapestry Education Ed conference that I went to? Has it changed anything? Am I still thinking those thoughts and having those reflections? Keep really good records. Talk to parents about what they want. Sometimes it's just a matter of changing a title. Tom's heard me say this before, but I worked with a school that was putting on behavior classes for parents of teenagers, and nobody came to those because who's going to admit they have a behavior issue? When they changed the title to I've got a teenager, get me out of here, they had to go get more chairs. Sometimes it's just a change of title, but you need to be talking to parents. What do they want and what do they need? Did that answer the question?
Sort of. I had a couple of bits to add myself. So I'm going to hurry along. I'll be quick in my bit. One is, I think schools often talk to parents, but are we hearing from just the parents that have the sort of social capital to come forward and answer us? And I heard about a really interesting example this morning of a school that basically put an ask out for parent voice, and they just asked the whole community, and everyone that responded, they parked as, right, those are the people that we're not interested in hearing from in this exercise. And they got a long list of people that had responded, said, those are the ones we're not interested in. Now, who else have we got, and how are we going to find out what they think about things? I just thought it was an interesting approach. Another little case study from this is only one school, but it was a primary school, and they put out a survey to their parents, and they said, what is it you do at home, and various questions you can imagine what you might put in a parent survey. And they had 7% of parents who responded. So then the next time around, they set a task for all the children to go home and interview their parents and to ask their parents about all these different issues, which were basically the exact same things that they'd put in the survey questions. But it was a task for children to speak to their parents and to try and together write it down. And they had a 70% response rate from the same group of parents. And I thought there were just a couple of really nice examples that I don't know how we'd adapt them for the early years, but I'm sure there's ways.
A head teacher I know talks about putting money in the bank, and he and his senior staff are on the playground every day and have a conversation about the football or a conversation about whatever, and just making those connections with parents so that when there are more difficult conversations, he says there's money in the bank. A teacher said to me at one point, they won't come in, they won't cross that line. So, well, you cross the line, go out. You don't. Your life does not revolve around the school building, and we know that now. We've proved that now. I do know a head teacher that has her parents' evening in the local pub. I'm not suggesting that you do that, but you certainly could have an event in a local swimming baths or leisure centre once it's safe to do that again. And don't neglect everything we've learned about connecting with people online.
Sure. We are supposedly out of time, but I feel bad not answering this question, so I'm going to put it to you briefly, Janet. From Muna, who says, if you're a new parent, how do you help the child develop?
Love your child, touch your child, call your child by name, read with them, and talk to them as though you were expecting an answer. Because one of the things that makes a difference is not just the number of words a child hears, but the number of interactions a child hears. Obviously, if you're talking to a 3-day-old infant and you're saying, isn't it a lovely day? The child is not going to answer you, but they're getting the idea that that sort of conversation goes on. Read with your child, love your child, and tell your child that you love them.
Thanks so much, Janet. I think that's a nice time to bring in Suma. So really, really excited to have Suma here today. She is an author, a researcher, and an educator. I first came across Suma through a podcast that she did about her book, Muslim Mothers, and interviewing a whole range of parents who were sort of distant from the education system and were often marginalized and voices that weren't heard. She's worked in the adult learning sector, delivering family learning and ESOL courses for many years, alongside writing books, educational resources, and not to be underestimated, raising her 3 children. She has a keen interest in parental engagement and has served widely within the voluntary sector. She's been a parent governor at 2 primary schools. She's a former SACRE board member and has also been a teacher. She's currently working on the mix of editing 2 forthcoming titles and asking questions, and then listening, which I think is so valuable, listening to parents' research projects, as well as cooking and collaging. Suma, over to you. Again, sorry, if you have questions, please keep them coming. It's been great to see so many. You can't sort of see each other's questions, I don't think, but just keep posting them and I'll collate them and add them. And we'll chat soon again. Thanks, Suma.
Hi, Tom, and hello to everybody there. Thank you very much for Tapestry for inviting me. Really honoured to be speaking on behalf of parents. And I'm just about to share my screen. Hopefully that's worked. Yep, as long as I know that's worked, then I can carry on. Yes, so I'm here really just extending the research that I started a few years ago, and that was to do with hearing the voices, as Tom just mentioned, of marginalized mothers, minoritized mothers, and how they encounter the education system. So I'm just going to get this started. Here we go. Right. So my aim today in talking to all of you and, just sharing their stories. So I'm really coming on the back of some really, really interesting questions that Jamal and Janet have posed, as well as their insights. And I think this is just gelled so well that now you'll actually hear from 3 parents that I'm going to share their stories on. So today, really simple things that I'm going to contextualize a bit of why I talk about mothers' voices. The second thing will be hearing the narratives of 3 parents and their experience of nursery and reception learning for their children. And then I'll just move on to reflecting on some themes that their experiences raise. And then finally, just thinking again of some ways to encourage engagement. And that it's just so good to hear the 2 talks before, because it's so aligned in terms of what's being advised and advocated and the things that these mothers said too. So in any sort of research, I think being transparent is really important. And I know Tom's already introduced the areas that I'm interested in, so I'm not going to repeat all of these, but it's just a couple of them I'll elaborate on, which explain where I'm coming from. And obviously the first is I am a parent, I'm a mum. I've got 3 adult children, they've been through the whole state school system in England. So I've experienced from the early years, preschool, all the way through. And I think that always is life-changing. And there's so much you learn about yourself, you learn about the system, obviously you learn about your children, and you keep learning. As Janet was saying, it's a lifelong endeavour. So that's one of the places I'm coming from. The second is that I've taught extensively in the voluntary sector, in the Muslim community, in supplementary schooling. And that's given me more than the normal amount of insight into parents' experiences who are from minorities. So I've been doing that for about over 20 years now. And on the professional side, as Tom mentioned, I've been a family learning practitioner. And I'll just say a word more about that, because it was such a great opportunity on and off for about 15 years, where I went in, this is through the adult learning sector, to run courses for parents on literacy and supporting their children's learning at Key Stage 1 and 2. And so there's a team of us, and we would, run sometimes short courses, sometimes longer ones. But the breadth of experience, parents' experiences that gave me really made me passionate about, how they interact with the school. For many of those parents, it was the first time they were coming into a school setting, often not really keen, but had to sort of be encouraged in. And then after 6 weeks of coming in regularly, really enjoying the experience, and then just, like flying on their own, really, because they got over some of the barriers or some of the fear factor. And it is frightening. And that's something that I think Jamal explained really well. And he got that feeling across that there can be so many barriers. I used to see those barriers as well and work with the parents. So that's just a little bit of where I'm coming from, which will, I suppose, help frame what I'm going to talk about. The other side of where I'm coming from is actual research. I went back to university myself about 6 years ago to do a master's on social justice and education. And I was, again, thank you to Janet for her research, because I really took on the whole parent engagement side of that course, and I found it really interesting. And I extended the reading after I finished into the area of maternal scholarship, and thinking about the sort of theoretical position of mothers, because they're quite absent, I found, when I was doing parent engagement going through the material and following a course on that, I thought, you know, where are mothers like myself and like people that I've been interacting with in the adult learning sector? I can't find the research on them. And when I left that master's, I wanted to do something practical with it, although I'd carry on working and so forth. I wanted to do some more research on what I knew was missing for educators. And so I did do about a year of research, talked to about 53 mothers in 5 locations across England, and asked them about their experience of the state school system. And this was very broad, it was very open for them to really raise what they wanted to, so sort of a grounded theory approach here. And the outcome, another year later, was this book, The Muslim Mothers and Their Children's Schooling. And that's actually just a picture of it being on the shelves at the IOE, where I used to see this gap, like where are their voices? I felt really pleased with the cooperation of the publishers, etc., at the university to actually get their voices there, so that they are sitting alongside other minorities and they are accessible, because it's really difficult, I understood from a lot of educators, to access a lot of communities. You know, it's not easy when educators are working really hard themselves on what they've got to do, delivering curriculum, you know, doing all the other things that come under this huge umbrella of teaching. Access to different communities isn't always possible. And going back to the question of training, I thought this would be a resource as hopefully part of teacher training as well. That's a little bit of background, and now I'm going to introduce the 3 mums. So these are new mothers that I talked to, not part of the original research. And I'm just going to reiterate some questions. I think we've already touched on these quite a few times now in the couple of talks, but as you're hearing from the 3 mothers that I'm going to select quotes from and discuss, it would be good to just keep this in mind. So what assumptions do we have about parents? Okay, this is something I've had to work with on myself as well when I was delivering adult learning classes. What do we already know and what do we need to know? Sometimes we think we know quite a bit, but actually we need to know a lot more. The third one is which stereotypes about groups of parents do we have? And that's media, that's a lot of things that are out there. And I think none of us can say we're immune to that. We've all got that issue where we've got to challenge ourselves. And that leads me to the last one. Are we challenging ourselves about our assumptions, about things that are just taken for as, you know, common sense or just general knowledge? Often they're not founded on facts. So with those questions in mind, I'd like to tell you a bit about the questions I asked these 3 mothers. And I've put this door here because when parents put their children in, and, you know, just a side note, when I'm saying mothers, yes, I was talking to mothers, but I'm actually, by that term, I do mean anyone who's taking on that caring role, could be a grandparent, father, uncle, auntie, whoever, you know, the work of that primary carer. When they put their child into the nursery or reception class, it does feel as they walk away and the door shuts as though it's really separate from their lives. And the same can happen the other way around when the child's leaving. You know, at the end of their session or at the end of the day, the door shuts and then the teacher's kind of behind this door of, well, what goes on the other side? And so the purpose of me talking to the mums is really to keep the door open and to say, well, actually, this is what they were thinking on the other side. And so when I approached them, I had 4 broad areas that I asked them about. The first was their home setting and daily lives, if they wanted to talk about that. Second was, what do they know about their child's learning and activities in the nursery and reception? What do they think about supporting their child's learning? Because that can mean so many things to so many people. and it can, be interpreted in multiple ways. And finally, how do they communicate with staff in their child setting? Because I think at the heart of so much of this afternoon's conference is communication, like genuine, sincere communication. I think there's nothing that really beats that. So the last question is something that you're going to keep hearing the answer to all the way through, I think, because we didn't necessarily follow these chronologically. It was just how the mothers felt like discussing it. So the first person is Mum A. She has 2 children. She's born in the UK. Her husband was born in Italy and came over. So they have a 5-year-old girl and a 2-year-old boy. She lives in Northampton. Obviously, this is anonymized, that she runs her own cake business. Ethnicity-wise, both parents are Bengali. And the second language going on in the house is the father's, because his first language is Italian. I hope I haven't scrambled anyone's brains there with all these language issues going on, but that's their context. So the first thing she wanted to sort of tell me about was their home setting and what she used to do before nursery. So this isn't actually on your slide, but I'll just read a little bit of it out to you. So she said, before preschool, I'd do a lot of reading with Zara, and the other one was younger than the other child, baking, colouring, messy play, arts and crafts. We used to really enjoy going to soft play playgroups and rhyme and story time in the library, and we'd also do plenty of outdoor trips and gardening. And then when we got on to discussing her experience as a parent, and in the nursery setting, she said, as we have on the slide here, I had an idea of what she was doing as there were displays and current things put on the notice boards. Because of those, I got the gist of what was going on and I could talk about it to Zara at home. There was an online journal thing. I would log in sometimes and see stuff from months ago. I didn't know when they'd upload things. Some things were from ages ago. I didn't find it that useful. But the same online journal was much more helpful in reception during lockdown, when there was regular posting and the teachers told us to look at it, so it helped. We then went on, sorry, my next slide, to talking about reception learning. And here there was quite a shift because it was actually a bit more difficult. And as you can see, she says here, I had no idea of what she was doing as there was nothing sent home to tell us that I'm aware of. During lockdown, when I watched live lessons, I saw what they were actually teaching. And I thought, oh my God, this is what she's supposed to know. She's behind then. And that's when I realized, but it was so stressful as I didn't know how high the expectations were. And I'll continue with a bit more of that discussion that she had. She said, how are we supposed to know? Like, where do parents find this all out? It seems like teachers think we just know what the levels are. The levels was a real sort of issue for this mum. And she says, I would prefer a document, a piece of paper or someone to talk to, or a booklet, even to say this is what we're doing and what they need to know. I know since the pandemic lockdowns, I know it's difficult for teachers too, but I can't get to the information when I'm bombarded with emails. There's just too many, like which ones are important and which ones aren't. And one of the emails it had a maths map on it, and I couldn't understand the terms being used. The only ones who seem to understand are teacher friends and relatives. Because I was getting so stressed out and talked about it, they told me what extra resources are available, what to ask the teacher, and they told me to ask, and they told me what pre-teaching I could do. But how do parents know where this is? And so mum A was, you know, quite understandably confused, feeling like out of sorts, that she just didn't know where to get this material and what the expectations were. So there's a lot we could discuss in that, but I'm actually going to move on, and hopefully I'll be able to discuss a bit about the themes at the end. But I want to present all three mothers' narratives first. So on home culture and learning, as home culture and well-being, this was really important to all three mothers, I found. And so we have some quotes from Mum A still here. She says, "I know this sounds stupid, but I didn't know you could ask about their well-being apart from parents' evening." And then she continued about actual home culture. She said, "Zara goes to Italian classes as my husband wants her to be fluent as it's his first language. So she might not be at the right levels for everything they expect at school, but she's learning so much outside reception too. Before the pandemic, we'd go to a newly built mosque regularly as it was child friendly and just a great place to go as a family. Zara loved it there, and it's an important place where she socialized. We also saw a lot of extended family. That's a big part of my children's lives. Even though she's only 5, she gained a lot from the elderly in the family, playing, singing, hearing stories, and just doing simple things with them." We then continued discussing home culture and school, and, you know, what this mum experienced in terms of diversity in the school, because I think we often, when we're running training or researching or writing, we like to split things up, but in real life, as we all know, especially parents or anyone who's cared for children, things aren't split up. They're all, you know, intersect, and they're all interconnected. So she went on to talk about the diversity in the school and said, "It's a hugely diverse school. There are children from Poland, Russia, Spain, India, France, mixed heritage families. They're from China, and Gypsy and Roma families. As far as I'm aware, there's no diversity in the staff though. And the only celebration I've heard of is Christmas because they had a party. It would be nice to see other backgrounds acknowledged too. Like, instead of dress up like a fairy day, maybe a day about one of these other cultures the children come from and learn about their traditions." So a lot, again, that I would love to come back to, but Mum A, if we leave her narrative there, I'm going to move on to Mum B and then Mum C, and you'll start to see so many of the patterns coming through in what they're saying. So Mum B lives in Oxfordshire. She's married with 2 children, a 3-year-old girl, a 2-year-old younger daughter. So she was born and raised in England, raised in East London, and her husband is from Bangladesh. The home language they speak is a dialect of Bangla, which is called Sylheti, and that's a particular district. You find in East London, majority actually of Bengalis there speak this dialect of Sylheti. So her narrative was actually, she wanted to jump straight into the experience of her daughter's learning. This mum works part-time in the education sector, and there'll be a bit more about this coming through in her narrative. So she said, you started off actually talking about nursery choice, and she said, "I researched where to put my daughter. The nursery near me, well, I wasn't that happy with it. I just didn't get the vibe that she'd get the best out of it here. There's some issues too, I read in the Ofsted report. So I chose the one further away. I like how it's a bit more structured. They had their themes up to see, and it was rated good by Ofsted. It is a bit further away, but it's worth it as it's near my in-laws, so they help out with pickups too." Now, in terms of nursery learning, this is quite revealing and not something I was expecting. She said, "I don't really get much feedback because of COVID, it's difficult as we can't talk face-to-face. On the one hand, and she continues, so I'm giving you the most relevant excerpts here. On the one hand, I want to support my daughter with extra activities, but on the other hand, I don't know how they're teaching her in terms of the methods. So I decided to stand back and wasn't hands-on. Then I did a bit of phonics with her and she said, "No, mummy, my teacher does it different." I told my husband not to do maths with her because he'll confuse her using the Asian methods. And I had to correct him when he tried doing sounds with her as it wasn't proper phonics. He used the old method of saying the alphabet, like how he learned. It would be helpful if the schools and nurseries did little parent sessions on their methods and just show the parents some basics so that we do the same as them, just for literacy and numeracy. Now about communication and learning, so Mum B's narrative continued, and it really did highlights of the dilemma parents who you think, okay, they know the system, but still as a parent, it's not always that much easier. So she continued by saying, when I wanted to know what they were doing and a term had gone by, I emailed them in January and I said, I'd like to know how my daughter was doing. They were really good and emailed back about her progress and what they were covering in the curriculum. During lockdown, they suggested websites to use and some videos to download. And she did say to me that actually that wasn't too stimulating and it wasn't sort of what she was hoping for. So she continued, she said, I requested any activity and they started to do story time on Zoom and it was brilliant with her teacher reading. And then that Mum B actually continued to say how interesting it was for her, because when she was trying to do the same book with her daughter, she wasn't really interested. As soon as the teacher and she saw the class and, you know, had that connection again, she'd be talking and asking questions about the book for the rest of the day. Now we come to a bit more about her own sort of barriers in communication, which are, I guess, quite common. But for this mum in particular, she said, sometimes I want to talk to her teacher now that it's back to normal school, but I hesitate. As I'm working 3 days a week, I don't get the chance anyway. But when I do collect her, I hesitate. I'm confident to talk to them, but still, I think, leave it. I don't want to pester them and be that busybody mum. So there's a lot more going on there. And then one of her suggestions was if they could focus maybe on 2 children a week and give a bit of feedback, that might help parents be in the know a bit more. A lot of parents are confused, like my sister-in-law's not born here. They don't have a clue what's going on. And in terms of culture, this again came up because the mothers found it something that they wanted to talk about and they wanted to share. She said, at home, I do reinforce our culture, like our food and language. We speak Sylheti at home with her. We celebrate things like Ramadan and the Eids, and she used to see a lot of extended family, cousins and all before the lockdown. She saw so much of them before. I teach my daughter to respect school events, and I want the teachers to treat her the same as everyone else. I don't want her to stick out because she's a minority. I don't think teachers are nasty or anything. They just don't know, and they've got stereotypes in their head. It's what they hear. At Christmas, they sent home some keywords to learn, and that was good. But it would have been nice to have keywords for Diwali, Chinese New Year, Eid, too. It'll help so kids growing up in less diverse areas won't think it's weird. Now, this mother's narrative went on, and I'm just going to go back up one slide before I share the rest. She actually started to talk about her own practice then as a primary school teacher. And I'll just read you a little bit of how her own experience then starts to influence what she's hearing from her daughter before I quote the rest of it. So she said, when my daughter started this nursery, they used to talk to me patronizing and a bit slowly because of how I dressed, like I didn't understand. I didn't tell them I was a primary school teacher. It just came out a few months later because of my work timings. I didn't say I'm a teacher because I want the nursery to take the lead and be the primary educator, and I'd support what they do. It's like when I do supply work at different primary schools and nurseries, when I was fasting, for example, they just didn't get it, not because they were being rude. They even said they live in their villages and they haven't come across someone fasting. So I explained it all and they were fine with it. And so moving on from that, she then reflects on whether her daughter's well-being and belonging and learning are gelling. Okay, so the next quote is actually in the light of that kind of conversation. She said, "I don't know, sometimes I wonder if I should have gone further out to this village school for her, and if it would have been better to bring her back to my local school where it's more mixed. Like there's so many different backgrounds in the local school with a nursery in it." She asked me recently, "Mummy, why am I brown and everyone else is white?" So is she already wanting to be different? I don't know. Maybe I'll move her. I can't decide. I'd like to get involved in the school community with bazaars and fundraising, but with the pandemic, things are different now. Parents are in clusters, people don't really mix, and that's why I'd want to get involved, to come together more. It's a bit difficult in the playground. Even if you're educated, it's still not that easy to just mix if you don't see anyone like you. And that's me grown up here. Imagine what it's like for people from overseas. And at the end of our interview, I think because you can be in this difficult position where you're an educator, but you're a parent, you're a minority parent, you know, there's a lot of things going on. She actually just sighed and said, "I'm pleased to talk to you, as people think because I'm a teacher, I should know it all. But in terms of supporting in the early years, sometimes I'm just as confused as other parents." And if we've got time, I've got one more parent. Is that okay, Tom?
I think, Suma, we're going to have to round it up if that's okay, just because I know we've got finish at 6 and we've got a whole host of questions that people have been asking you.
Right. Okay. So I'll leave out the third mum, and I'll just maybe say 10 seconds on what the main themes were.
Sounds good.
Yep, which were they wanted to know about their sources of, you know, they needed more sources of information. That was one of their needs that came out. I think the different platforms that are used have to be thought through, and I know Jamal and Janet have both talked about that. Their child's learning and their well-being, the relationship between both was really strong, and we know that it is strong, but they voiced it themselves. And they wanted some kind of alignment between what they're doing, what the nursery's doing. They really wanted to support what reception's doing, but felt like they didn't understand where to start, some of them, in some instances. And minoritized mothers' experiences themselves can affect their interaction at all levels, including school choice. So the very, very last thing is ways forward. So I was going to talk about, and I won't go into detail now, but valuing cultural capitals that exist in the home already, asking parents about their culture, festivals, you know, just engaging. Also providing parent-to-parent opportunities, sometimes that really helps. Training opportunities on an institutional level, and I know that that's been covered, but I think something where it genuinely does speak to the needs of that particular school community. And the very last word is, as a mum, I had a really excellent experience with our children's nursery and reception teacher, who had done all this 20 years back. And he had such a good understanding sort of different cultures, faiths. We had nothing in common, but my children are still kind of have really good memories of him in their 20s. He was actually a singer, a songwriter, and he used to write songs and perform them to the kids. And they remember all of that. And there was a real, you know, sort of a good partnership. I felt that partnership as a mum, to end on that note. So I'll hand over back to Tom because I know time is moving on really quickly.
Thank you so much, Suma. It's so great to hear from a group of parents. Sorry, start my video. And yeah, as I say, loads of questions coming in. I'll pick a couple of ones that sort of recurring themes. So you've talked about it a little bit there, but the question about celebrating other traditions and how we can do that in a nursery. Do you want to build on that at all?
Yeah, I think there's one thing that I come across a lot with educators, and they're very well-intentioned often. They don't want to offend anybody. And that often means that they don't ask questions. So when you do want to be inclusive and have other celebrations going on, ask. It's really simple. Just ask parents. Just say, you know, oh, you've had a baby. Do you do something different around when a baby's born? Do you have a celebration? What's it called? What do you do? Most people have naming ceremonies of some type. They're really interesting. I find them fascinating. It doesn't have to be religious necessarily, those festivals. It could be, you know, cultural things. There's countries that people come from, they have different New Year's, they have different seasonal celebrations going on. And often those are celebrated in the home. So a simple 3-worded answer is ask.
I think that's really nice. There was a case study of a school where they got all of the children to try speaking Polish, because they had a big Polish community, and they got all the English community, basically all of the children in the school, but many of whom, you know, had no Polish links, to start trying to learn Polish words and speaking Polish a little bit and what have you. And what they found was that, as well as the sort of exposure to that culture, and, you know, as you say, celebrating Chinese New Year does an awareness thing, it also, there's like subtler things that are happening around the power dynamic, where suddenly that kid from the Polish background is the expert and knows more about the culture and more about those things than others. And I imagine it's similar with, as you say, celebrating traditions other than just Christmas. And suddenly the people that are celebrating Eid or Ramadan or Diwali will know so much more and have that like extra power in the classroom.
And I think that that's a really great example, because our ESOL tutor did that with us when we were training. He started speaking to us in Japanese and just put us in the other seat. But and that's always important. I think when children see something of their culture in primary school, the effect is not just there and then. I mean, I know with my kids in their 20s now, the effect lasts way beyond, in terms of confidence and having just a good positive association of their learning environment.
Another question that came up a couple of times is, sort of in summary, what would you say was the parents' biggest worry or anxiety of the parents that you spoke to?
That their children, that they didn't know what was expected, and what the class teacher wanted from their child, in terms of, there's a lot of talk about levels and, you know, achieving, and I think that's generally quite stressful for mothers, and that kept coming through, that they want to support, but they just didn't know exactly. One who was a primary school teacher didn't know about the method. The third parent that we didn't get round to just wanted to support, but often wasn't sure until, funnily enough, the pandemic opened the classroom up and they saw the methods of teaching. So that third mother actually said, it was when I saw how the teacher did things that really helped me support just nuanced language and an insight. So yeah, I think that those are a couple of main things that came through.
Perfect, thank you. We had another question about solving the methods, and if it's okay, I think that's exactly what the Learning with Parents platform was designed to do, was to help parents. You know, one of the benefits was to help parents with that gap of, should I be teaching it my way, or should I be, you know, teaching it the way the school does, and how do I understand what the school methods are? So definitely, you know, a connection there as well. Last question, if I can, and I feel like you've sort of covered it, but one person said, what can I do to understand experiences the sort of background experiences that might influence how minority mothers in my class interact with the school?
That's a big one. Go to a place you're not comfortable in sometimes, and that can really make you, feel what it's like to not belong to the majority. But yeah, apart from that, and that's something that can't be done easily, but I think talking, that was another thing that came through from the mothers, that they would like face-to-face interaction. So as a practitioner, I've been in that situation as well, from a practitioner's point of view, of not understanding where a parent's coming from, and my work was all to do with parents. It's really having that time of just a relaxed conversation with them, and just understanding a bit more about the dynamics of their culture, their background. They're more than happy to talk about it if they feel it's a relaxed conversation, and it's not just about levels and achievement and structural things that can be a bit frightening.
Yeah, it's all the things that Jamel and Janet were talking about as well. On that note, thank you so much, Suma. I think we're going to hand back over to Helen and the Tapestry team to wrap us up. But yeah, a massive thank you to Janet, Jamel, and Suma. And I know from all the questions in, there's been a really positive response to all of your speeches. So thank you so much, everyone. Helen, are we over to you?
Okay, so that's it for today's conference then. And what an interesting and thought-provoking session it's been. Thanks so much to our guest speakers, Jamel, Suma and Janet, for their insight and expertise, and to our guest host, Tom, from Learning with Parents. We hope you've enjoyed yourselves and have lots to take away and ponder on this critical subject of parental engagement. From all of us at Tapestry and the Foundation Stage Forum, thanks for your company this evening, and goodbye until our next TEC.